This show is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network.
To join our community Discord or see more content from our members, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com.
Hello everyone and welcome to Dragon Mind, the TTRPG podcast where we discover our best selves through gaming. Today, we are not continuing our D&D 2024 Practical Possibilities coverage, instead covering the newest 2025 D&D Unearthed Arcana Forgotten Realms subclasses. And it's a pretty chunky one. We get 8 subclasses that are all apparently going to be released in the Forgotten Realms player guide coming out later this year. Gotta be honest, this is probably not a product I'm going to pick up. I think for a lot of D&D fans, if not the majority that end up playing in the Forgotten Realms, this is going to be a pretty quality product. It's just at this stage of where I'm at, D&D wise specifically, I've got enough material, but I digress. So in the interview video with Todd Kenrick, Jeremy Crawford starts off by talking about all the lovely feedback they got from the Artificer UA, which was not that long ago, and he talks about a new survey method that they're taking, where rather than looking at satisfaction percentages, they're looking at it in terms of green, yellow, and red. Green being that players really liked some feature just as is. Yellow is they like the feature, but they feel like it needs some rewriting. And red is, boo, get this out of here. The one thing that kind of, bothered, not even make me worry because I'm not overly invested at this point, is just how he mentioned that now that they've filtered out the green and yellow responses, now they can look at the written feedback. And the reason that this was kind of is because there might be something in the red zone written feedback that's still worth reading. So there have been times where I've done Unearthed Arcana surveys where there's been a feature I really just don't like, but I give a pretty thoughtful explanation to what I think would be a good substitution for it, even though I don't find it satisfactory. It's kind of like when he was talking about the Player's Handbook UA, and he mentioned something about how someone will say they're not satisfied with a class, but they're satisfied with all the individual features, which means that they changed their mind as they went through the survey. Not necessarily. Sometimes you're really satisfied with all the features that are presented, but the reason you're unsatisfied with the entire package is because there's something else it needs in order to become satisfactory as a whole. So it's just a great example of how sometimes how we interpret data isn't super instinctive, but I digress. Now, like I said, the Forgotten Realms subclasses, these are all subclasses that are tied specifically to the Forgotten Realms. So the 8 that we're getting are the Bard College of Moon, Knowledge Domain Cleric, Purple Dragon Knight Fighter, Oath of the Noble Genies Paladin, Winter Walker Ranger, Scion of the Three Rogue, Spellfire Sorcery Sorcerer, and Bladesinger Wizard. For those of you that have been keeping up with D&D for a while, 3 of these will sound awfully familiar. Knowledge Domain, Purple Dragon Knight, and Bladesinger are reworks of subclasses that were released early on in 5th edition. The Knowledge Domain Cleric first appeared in the 2014 Player's Handbook. Purple Dragon Knight and Bladesinger both appeared in Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and apparently Bladesinger was popular enough that it was reworked as part of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in 2020. So really we're getting 5 new subclasses, but even then, they aren't really new. A lot of them seem to just be reworked subclasses from different base classes. So for example, as I was reading Oath of the Noble Genies, I was like, that sounds real familiar to Genie Warlock. And Scion of the Three Rogue, I was like, that sounds a lot like Conquest Paladin. So even though, yes, a lot of these ideas are quote-unquote new, they're going to be really familiar for someone that's been playing 5th edition for a long time. Now, I do like the approach of having specific subclasses that are rooted within a specific setting. That being said, Forgotten Realms is far from my favorite D&D setting. Personally, I find Forgotten Realms to be really messy in terms of lore. While it was the default setting of 5th edition where most of its modules took place, I found that the stories, for the most part, weren't so Forgotten Realms centric that I couldn't easily just lift them up and pop them in a different setting. Now, luckily, looking at these different subclasses, if you really wanted to, you could file the Forgotten Realms stuff off of them, and they could still work in a variety of settings. And one of the things that my personal playgroup was chatting about in our group chat is just the fact that D&D is moving toward a much more magical sense of world building. One of the big examples is Purple Dragon Knight, where in Sword Coast Adventures Guide, the Purple Dragon Knight was a very mundane subclass in the sense that most of its features revolved around inspiring your allies, either through uses of Second Wind or Action Surge. And now it's a magical dragon rider. Different players are going to respond to this shift toward more magical subclasses differently. While I think you can still build mundane characters using the D&D 2024 system, the game is in a way getting more specific in the sense that there is just magic everywhere encoded in the system, and if you want to play a less than high magic game, D&D is becoming less and less of a viable option for your group. Again, without heavy homebrew or reflavoring or the like. One other little interesting thing I wanted to mention before diving into the subclasses, with the previews for the 2025 Monster Manual, Todd Kenrick has been interviewing both Jeremy Crawford and Wesley Schneider. A lot of times I feel like Jeremy Crawford is spending most of the time talking. What I thought was interesting with this UA is that Jeremy Crawford said the thing about surveys, and then was like, Mackenzie Diarmas, you're up. It's really interesting because I know whenever Mackenzie specifically comes up in these interviews, a lot of the chat is basically asking for more of her. She tends to have a bubblier personality. You can tell that she's really enthusiastic and passionate about the material she's developing. And in some ways, she is a great complement to Jeremy Crawford's kind of slower, more methodical style. I don't know if there's anything to read into about that. To me, it just stood out that when it comes to the Monster Manual, like Jeremy Crawford needs to be there with Wesley Schneider, whereas when it comes to the UA, he's like, Mackenzie, take the reins. It could also just be a simple scheduling thing. Jeremy Crawford's a busy guy. Anyway, on to the subclasses we're actually getting. So first is the College of Moon Bard, and this bard is tied to lore surrounding the Moonshae Isles in Faerun. Not only does this subclass have a lot of Fae influence in the same way that Glamour Bard does in the 2024 PHB, but you can see references to specifically druidic magic. It's kind of like how the Eldritch Knight is a subclass for fighter that kind of sort of dips into wizard territory. In the same way, this is a bard that kind of starts to dip into druid territory. Skipping around a little bit, one of its 3rd level features allows you to learn the druidic language and a cantrip from the druid spell list. It also gives you a proficiency in animal handling, insight, medicine, nature perception, or survival. I could see a character with this subclass having a backstory where maybe they were raised as a druid, but rather than stay in the forest or the Isles or whatever, this character decided to travel around the world. So they have hints of druidic magic from their upbringing, but as a bard, they like to travel and entertain rather than be more cloistered than druids tend to be in D&D lore. Now, its signature ability is called Moonshae Folktales. As a magic action, you can activate the feature, which gives you some additional uses of your bardic inspiration. The Tale of Life option is when you restore hit points to a creature with a spell. You can expend a bardic inspiration die to increase the amount of hit points equal to the die's roll. Tale of Gloam is when you use a bonus action to give a creature a bardic inspiration die. you can take the disengage or hide action as part of the same bonus action. And then Tale of Mirth is filling the hole left by cutting words in Lorebard, where when you see an enemy succeed a saving throw within 60 feet of you, you can take a reaction to expend your Bardic Inspiration die, roll the die, and subtract that number from the save's total. Lorebard specifically calls out damage, ability checks, and attack rolls. So Tale of Mirth, I think, depending on your party composition, could probably be more useful, especially now that fighting characters are triggering more saving throws with their weapon masteries. And of course, spellcasting characters' biggest effects usually are tied to a saving throw rather than an attack roll. The one thing about Moonshae Folktales I don't like is the magic action activation cost. It's not a transformation sequence like other subclasses where you use a magic action and it lasts a minute or something. You use the magic action to set up your use of the folktales. Once you use your choice, then the magic goes away and you have to reset it up as a magic action. Not a huge fan of that action economy, especially looking at Tale of Life. Unless you're using Healing Word as a bonus action, really it's asking you to use a magic action to set up and then wait another turn until you use your action to cast a spell like Cure Wounds. This also makes me giggle because, again, I sometimes think that these subclasses get stuck on certain words. So again, Moonshae Isles, it has to be a Moon Bard, meaning at 6th level we have to be able to cast Moonbeam, and it allows you to cast it as a bonus action without expending a spell slot. And when a creature fails its save against this version of Moonbeam, you can restore 2d4 hit points to a creature of your choice within 60 feet of you. And then at level 14, Moonshae Folktales gets boosted. Overall, I think College of Moon as a mechanical kit is okay. I think it needs a second pass, especially looking at the heavy cost of using your magic action to activate Moonshae Folktales. To be honest, I would be okay just removing Tale of Life and Tale of Mirth, even though Tale of Mirth is really good, to just get Tale of Gloam, where anytime you use your bonus action to give out a Bardic Inspiration die, you can disengage and hide as part of the same bonus action. Personally, I just like Valor and Lore so much, I probably wouldn't see myself taking this if I were building a character. Which brings us to the remastered Knowledge Domain Cleric. Now the first thing we get at 3rd level is proficiency with Artisan's tools of our choice, and expertise in any of the 2 skills of our choice, Arcana, History, Nature, and Religion. We also get Knowledge Domain spells. One thing that Mackenzie DeArmas pointed out specifically is if you notice, there's more than the regular amount of bonus spells granted when you pick this domain. That being said, most of them are utility. So, for example, at level 3, you get Comprehend Languages, Detect Magic, Detect Thoughts, and Identify, none of which are particularly combat heavy. You do get Command and Mind Spike. Mind Spike is definitely a new one because that wasn't in the player's handbook originally. But basically, as I read these spells, I'm not seeing anything particularly unbalanced. Even at level 9, you're getting Scrying and Legend Lore and Synaptic Static. One of those I'm going to use a whole bunch. But I like how it also relates to Mind Magic at level 3, which is you can use a magic action and expend a use of Channel Divinity to pick a Knowledge Domain spell, and you can cast that spell as part of the magic action without expending a spell slot or needing material components. So the example they used is around levels 9 or 10, you automatically have Legend Lore prepared, and now you can use a Channel Divinity to skip the material component cost and the spell slot cost in order to just learn things. Legend Lore has never been a spell that I've picked up on a character, but having it part of this mechanical package would make me interested in actually trying it out. Then you get Unfettered Mind, which is you gain telepathy where you can contact multiple creatures up to your wisdom modifier. Additionally, if your total for an intelligence check is lower than your wisdom score, you can use that score in place of the total. One of the things that's always bothered me about certain designs before 2024 is how you'll get something like a Knowledge Domain Cleric, which really gets good at intelligence-based skills, which is not what your character is prioritizing. So especially with the new cleric and druid base classes, where you have an option that allows you to access your wisdom to get higher intelligence rolls, this type of design is one that I think will make for stories that make better sense given the mechanical choices that you're making. Knowledge Domain is actually one I could see myself taking. I don't think it's unbalanced at all. I just think that it finds a way to make it easier to access some underutilized spells. So Purple Dragon Knight, originally premiering in Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, is just completely reworked. It's no longer the inspiring banneret, but rather it's a Dragon Rider class. Very reminiscent of the Drake Warden from Fizban's Treasury. Also, again, it's a Purple Dragon Knight, so the Dragon Companion has to be Amethyst, because that's a purple dragon. The one thing about Purple Dragon Knight I will be interested to follow is that Purple Dragon Knights have been embedded in Faerunian lore as a specific type of Comerian Knight that have not traditionally been Dragon Riders. So while I understand that from a design perspective, it's easy enough with a reboot of a new edition to present them in a new way, I'm just curious if folks will tend to be excited or if they're going to be a little put off by the fact that the lore is being heavily messed with. In terms of their actual mechanics, the first thing we get is Knightly Envoy. They get to learn a language of their choice. They can also cast Comprehend Languages as a ritual. Personally, I don't think ritual casting counts to me in the same way that other spell casting can, because it's not as spontaneous. Like, to me, if you're in a magic-based world, any knowledgeable enough character can figure out real low-level rituals. I also like to have my rituals have material components involved, but I digress. That being said, these are definitely magical characters because the Purple Dragon Companion has a telepathic bond with them. Also, this is going to be a fighter that's going to want to prioritize intelligence as a secondary or tertiary stat because the Purple Dragon Companion's AC is tied to it, as well as its rend attack and its gravity breath. Personally, if I were the DM, I wouldn't bind my player to just an Amethyst Dragon. If they wanted a White Dragon Companion or a Gold Dragon Companion, I would just change the breath type. And Force is going to be the most reliable damage type you can get. At level 7, your Dragon Companion, which starts as small, turns to medium, and you can use them as a mount. And eventually, you and the Purple Dragon will have resistance to Force and Psychic damage. Again, we've gotten a Dragon Riding subclass with Ranger before, and seeing both of them side by side, I kinda like it on the Fighter base class a little bit better. So Oath of the Noble Genie's Paladin really looks like just a reflavor of the Genie Warlock. With the Genie Warlock, you would get to switch between elemental effects that would augment your Eldritch Blast in different ways. This is very similar, just with Divine Smite. So, for example, if you pick the Tao, which is the Earth Genie, your Divine Smite helps grapple and restrain someone, like the earth moving around them and pinning them in place. You can teleport after Divine Smite, which is probably the best of them. Or you can just spend the Channel Divinity to make them take 2d4 extra fire damage. I think it's balanced fire damage. It's just the most boring of the options. And Merid's Surge is when you Divine Smite, you can use a Channel Divinity to make every creature of your choice in a 10-foot emanation make a strength save, and on a failed save, they're pushed 15 straight away and have the prone condition. None of these are bad options. I just think, personally, probably Genie's Escape and Merid's Surge are the two I'd use most often, followed by Tao's Crush if I'm against one big bad guy. The Genie spell list is also not bad. I'm probably not going to use Chromatic Orb a lot, but it's thematic and it's kind of neat as an option. I really like that you can get Fly, and I don't know if we've talked about it, but Conjure Minor Elementals, that's a good spell, especially to pop on a Paladin of all things. And then, of course, the other one that Mackenzie in particular was excited about was Genie's Splendor. So at 3rd level, if you aren't wearing medium or heavy armor, you gain a bonus to your AC equal to Charisma modifier. She mentioned that she likes playing dex-based paladins, and this just kind of supports it. I don't know why the Genie class in particular gets this, but it does create some more interesting build options, I think. The one thing with Noble Genie's Paladin, when thinking back on the different paladins in the player's handbook, this is definitely the strongest. So next, the Winter Walker Ranger. This is the Icewind Dale subclass. So as you would expect from a Frigid Explorer, you get resistance to cold damage. The thing I really like is when you hit a creature, you deal 1d4 extra damage once per turn. The damage ignores resistance to cold damage, especially when looking at some elemental subclasses. That's the one thing, is when you get extra elemental damage, but it's a commonly resisted to damage type. It's cool, but a lot of times is missing its like coolness factor. I don't know. It doesn't make you feel as powerful as it should. So it's nice to see that the 1d4 cold damage ignores cold resistance. Of course, it's gotta play with Hunter's Mark. So, and it's so funny. When I'm looking at Oath of the Noble Genies, I'm not like, ugh, Paladin smites are getting better, ugh. But I don't know why, but whenever I look at a Ranger subclass, I look at it's like, when you cast Hunter's Mark, you gain temporary hit points. I'm like, ugh, Hunter's Mark. Hunter's Mark is stupid. And I guess Hunter's Mark could be less stupid. Oh, while a creature is marked by Hunter's Mark, it can't disengage. That's neat. It's just, I don't know why I hate on Hunter's Mark as like the Ranger feature so much. Every other class has a signature feature. I think if Hunter's Mark was better as a base feature, like it did 2d6 force damage on top of whatever attack once a turn, which was the playtest version that I hated, I think I wouldn't make fun of it so ruthlessly, but that's my own personal bias. Anyway, the Winter Walker spells, I don't know why I like them so much. I've never built a Ranger and been like, hey, I want to cast Ice Knife. But then again, I have a lot of fun memories using Ice Knife as a high-level druid at 1st level. The amount of, like, boss legendary encounters I reduced to 0 hit points with a 1st level Ice Knife on my druid. I have such a soft spot for Ice Knife. And Cone of Cold is a neat AoE to give a Ranger that's at 17th level. It's not gonna be the most amazing thing, but hey, you're a half caster. Actually, of all of these, I think Winter Walker is probably my favorite of the subclasses so far, even if I do make fun of Hunter's Mark. I think it's the one I could reasonably see myself play because it's tied to an actual adventure you can play in Faerun. Wait a minute. That's what they're doing here. College of Moon Bard is for Wild Beyond the Witchlight. I don't know what Knowledge Domain Cleric is for. But Purple Dragon Knight would be for Tyranny of Dragons. I see what they did. Oath of the Noble Genies Paladin would be for Elemental Evil. Winter Walker is Icewind Dale. That's pretty clever. Scion of the Three is for Descent into Avernus. So Scion of the Three, which everyone should know because everyone's played Baldur's Gate, is a rogue that draws power from the Dead Three, Bane, Baal, and Merkel. Now, what's cool is some rogues of this subclass pledge themselves to one of those 3 gods. Others find themselves thrust on this path by a curse. You know, in case you want a Dirge playthrough. Now, the signature feature is Bloodthirst, where if you hit a bloodied creature with sneak attack, it takes extra damage of the weapon's type equal to half your rogue level rounded up. That's not bad. Also, when an enemy you see is reduced to 0 hit points, you can take a reaction and teleport to an unoccupied space you can see within 30 feet of yourself, and then make a melee attack. Which means, if things are aligned correctly, you can trigger your sneak attack again off round. That would be the best use of it, I think. I mean, another way to look at it is, let's say you do defeat an enemy with sneak attack or whatever. You saw the enemy reduced to 0 hit points, so you can take that reaction on your own turn to teleport to hit a second creature. I could see that being super useful on certain multi-class builds. But I think the best use of it is going to end up being using it off turn when an ally reduces a creature to 0. Still, that's a really useful ability, and I would definitely play a rogue with it. Also, this is going to be a subclass that prioritizes intelligence again as a secondary stat, because you can use the reaction a number of times equal to your intelligence modifier. The other thing at 3rd level is once per long rest, you get a resistance to psychic, poison, or necrotic, depending on which of the dead 3 you want to draw from more. And you also get a cantrip, minor illusion, blade ward, or chill touch, none of which are particularly amazing. I think of them, I think minor illusion would probably be the one I would pick. Now, level 9 is also, this is where I'm like, this is a conquest paladin. You get a new cunning strike option, which is Terrify. So for 1d6 less damage, you can force a target to make a wisdom save or frighten them for a minute. And then at level 17, you have advantage on attack rolls against any creature with the frightened condition. Then we get to Spellfire Sorcery. I'm not sure if there's an adventure tied to this one. Maybe Candlekeep Mysteries. I don't know. Maybe that Vecna Eve of Ruin adventure I didn't pick up. But the idea with Spellfire is it's like raw magical potential. Basically the similar flavor that I recently suggested for a Warlock remake in my latest Practical Possibilities. But its key thing is Spellfire Burst. So if you spend at least 1 sorcery point as part of the magic action or a bonus action, you or one creature you can see gets temporary hit points, or you can force a dex save to deal fire or radiant damage. You also get Spellfire spells. Say that 5 times fast. And they're neat. They're mostly cleric-like. You know, Cure Wounds, Guiding Bolt, Flame Strike, Greater Restoration. The one that I read and I was like, oh man, is at level 6, you always have Counterspell prepared. And whenever a target fails a saving throw against Counterspell, you regain 1d4 sorcery points. That's just mean. Again, I could see myself playing Spellfire Sorcerers, especially for that level 6 ability. The last one we get is a reworked Blade Singer. Blade Singer is pretty close to what it was. The design notes now say that when your Blade Song is active, you can use your intelligence modifier for attack and damage rolls, rather than strength or dex. The number of uses is tied to intelligence modifier rather than proficiency bonus, which I really like. And the other one is right at the end around level 14. Song of Victory used to be you can add your intelligence modifier to the damage of melee attacks while Blade Song is active. That's now apparently, well, you're not adding your intelligence, you're just swapping your intelligence. Song of Victory is now much better. After you cast a spell that has a casting time of an action, you can make an attack with a weapon as a bonus action. Very similar to old school Eldritch Knight, except as a full caster at 14th level, you're casting 7th level spells. Overall, I think a lot of the design ideas in this Unearthed Arcana are really neat. I do think that, in general, a lot of these subclasses are a little bit more powerful, or at least offer a lot more options than their players' handbook counterparts would allow at the same levels. For players worried about power creep, this is an indication that that's going to be coming hard and fast in this new edition. But I'm not sure I'm looking at any of these subclasses in particular, and I wouldn't allow them in my game if I wasn't playing in Forgotten Realms. From a purely story perspective, I think they can plug into a lot of different fantasy settings. The thing I would just pay attention to is if your group is sensitive to power balances of various options, be judicious about which of these subclasses you allow and which ones you don't. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Dragonmind is a proud member of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. To discover more TTRPG content like this, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com. If you had any insights or questions, be sure to email us at dragonmindpodcast@gmail.com or post in our discussion channel in the Darkmoor Podcast community Discord, linked in the description below. Our theme song, J-Pop, is brought to you by Thesleyan Studios. You can check out more of their awesome work at thesleyanstudios.com. Have an awesome day, and remember, your story matters. Bye-bye now.
Well, Grimton, Morlinde and Ulrich are gone. We're in a new, unfamiliar land of Kolgafir. What's our first move?
Polaris, I'm not too certain, but I did hear Fishbelly talking about something.
Oh, yeah. With the Warlord's half-sister in a meeting.
Yeah, that's about the only lead we have so far. We haven't been here long. Might be worth checking out.
Seems like a plan to me.
Join us as our party explores an unforgiving region of the Cusp and allies with new party members in Arc 3 of Advantage, a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons audio drama focused on storytelling and character development, and the Darkmoor Podcast Network. Find us in your podcast app.